Hey everyone, welcome to my second episode in the Personality in Detail series. Today is C, Conscientiousness. I'm doing this all in alphabetical order. And today we're going to have an in-depth look of the conscientiousness trait, how it affects your personal life, your careers, prospects for career, etc., etc. And coming up. Righto, here we go. Hey, I made a rhyme in no time. Sorry, that was so terrible. Right, conscientiousness. Right, so a person who is conscientious is let's have a couple of descriptive words here to sort of get you on the how can you say, on the right track, right? So someone who's high in conscientiousness, or at least has a decent degree of conscientiousness. So you're looking at from a rating from 0 to 100 percentile. So if you are about sort of 50 plus, 50 is sort of your average conscientiousness. So, ideally, so you'll really see it the most in people who are at least in the 50th percentile and are probably more, about 60 and onwards. These start to become quite apparent in the people who are high in conscientiousness. So, for example, you have self-efficacy, orderliness, dutifulness. They're high achievers. They're very self-disciplined. And they can be quite cautious. So they are the sort of people that prefer to err on the side of caution. So rather, they hate making mistakes. They really don't like making mistakes at all. Self-sufficient, and very trustworthy people. They do. You give them a job and they do it. They're not the type to procrastinate, and they tend to be the sort of people that they'll make really good managers and things of that sort. It's the kind of person, if you are an employer, you want conscientious people in your workplace. Just end of story. It's like if you employed people based on this trait alone, you would do really well. You wouldn't have to do performance reviews because they would just work. So that is an overview. Now, obviously, then people who are low in conscientiousness, they will tend to be unreliable, disorganized, the type of people that always show up late, lazy, irresponsible. They lose things all the time, and so on and so forth. So, it's quite a self-evident trait when you look at it, and interesting thing is, we often talk about, a person is irresponsible because they were raised to be irresponsible. That's not necessarily the case. That's part of their personality trait. It's like we said, it's a biological thing. It can be like I said in when I'm talking about agreeableness, these things can be mediated or mitigated through the upbringing. But people are generally this way. But it's not all bad, because if you're low in conscientiousness, you're a lot more easygoing. You're less rigid. You're more flexible with things. You don't mind changing things. You don't mind change in general. If you're low in conscientiousness, so there are the pros and cons, but the most benefits are actually associated with higher conscientiousness. Now, one of the fascinating things is if you look at the political sphere. Now, I hate politics, but if you look at the political sphere, it's absolutely fascinating, where if you understand the personality traits, you will find that the strongest predictors of which way a person will vote actually comes down to the trait conscientiousness and openness. So, generally speaking, the political sphere, the war is actually going on between people of conscientiousness, high in conscientiousness, and people high in openness. So high conscientious people tend to be more conservative, and the high openness people tend to be the more liberal. And this is actually really fascinating. So someone who's conscientious likes rules and likes everything to be in order, walls between this and that and everything in its tidy little category, whereas people who are high in openness but low in conscientiousness is like, well, let's just pull up all the stops and let's just have chaos, because chaos is where we can create new things and new ideas and have new experiences. And so that's literally what's going on. I mean, the past election, in the recent election in the US was perfect example. It's like, do we open the borders or do we close the borders? Do we build a wall? Do we not build a wall? It's just so. Interestingly enough, the fact that Donald Trump won demonstrates that there is a preponderance of people who are, how can I say, not necessarily an overpreponderance of people who are high in conscientiousness, but a preponderance of people for whom the situation has become so unstable, in terms of immigration, in terms of the how can we say, the uprooting of the dismantling of the family unit, the insanity with the dismantling of concepts of gender and gender roles and things of like that, where that has become so far gone in the insanity, like they say, the radical far left, that even for people who are generally liberal and generally quite open and don't mind uprooting barriers, are saying, whoa, we need to put the brakes on this business, because this is now going too far. So you'll find, and this is one of the interesting things, is like, if you even see a lot of homosexual people who are prominent in out there and who speak and have talk shows, even some of them are starting to say, so generally speaking, homosexuals are one of those people who say, well, let's uproot the barrier of strict heterosexuality and let's open the way up to other things. And even they are saying this transgender stuff is just, it's gone way too far now, and it's so let's pull back. And you find that even a lot of homosexual people are now almost being red pilled, as it were. Like, there's a gentleman by the name of David Rubin, for example, really, really nice guy actually. He's got a channel called the Rubin Report. Decent bloke, and he's now sort of come over to the conservative side a bit more, saying, things they've just gone completely wacko, and so we need to start pulling back. And so that's actually what you are finding in the world now, where they're too chaotic, so people are now wanting to pull back. And that's why we're actually at a point now where it seems like conservatism is where the left has gone so far left that they've even left the leftists behind in the right. and everyone's just pulling back, and they'll be like, wow, this is just too crazy. So it's really, really interesting. Now, the correlation is so strong that if you look at conscientiousness and you look at openness, for example, that you can predict which way the person will vote. I believe, and I'm correct me if I'm wrong, with about a 75% accuracy, you could predict, based on conscientiousness and openness alone, which way people would vote. And that's very, very interesting. So for those of you who are Christians, and especially those of you who are Seventh-day Adventists, such as myself, in the Seventh-day Adventist church in the moment, you're having a big argument about whether we should allow women's ordination or not, right? And in a lot of ways, it's also a battle between people who are conscientiousness and open. So people who are open, who are high in openness, they're like, yeah, well, why not let women go ahead and be ordained as elders and pastors. And then the more conservative people are saying no, and there's a battle going on there. And generally speaking, obviously not always. For example, I'm low in conscientiousness. I'm only in the 65th percentile, but I'm in the 90th percentile of openness. But I disagree with women's ordination. It shouldn't be done, and there's reasons for that. So it's not everyone. Obviously, it's a general statement. But there's this battle going on even within the church about, we're so conservative. The one side is like, we're so conservative that it's stifling and it's stagnating, and then the other side is saying, well, these people are too liberal, that they're just bringing in insanity into the church. And or everything that we had that was tradition and that was doctrine and all that kind of stuff, they're just throwing it right out the window to just do whatever they want. And so there's this battle going on in the church. And so obviously, wherever you have human beings, the personality traits are going to clash. And the proper way to go about it is for, again, as always, the two to come together in the middle, have a discussion about things, because it's true. You can be so rigid that things stagnate, but you can also be so open that you allow poison to come in, and it's perfectly rational, and so this needs to the discussion needs to be had in a proper way. Now, conscientiousness, going back to conscientiousness specifically. So they're very, very highly organized people. They like their rules. So again, you will have a preponderance of conscientious people in the business world, for example, right? So people who are very, very high in conscientiousness, they work all the time. That's all they know how to do. That's just work. Obviously, as the scale goes up, so in conscientiousness, someone who's in the middle, let's say 50th percentile, they'll be, they'll work hard enough to get by, basically, to not get fired. And the higher up the scale it goes, until you start hitting the 90th percentile, 95th, 98th, 99th percentile, those 90 plus, those people, they just work all the time. It's like they know nothing else. And they're what we call the workaholics. And specifically in the business world, right? So conscientiousness breaks down into industriousness and orderliness, right? And they're actually different. So people who are high in orderliness are very, very good at organizing things, maintaining structures, paperwork, administration, things of that sort. And people who are industrious are the people who just go out and just they just make things happen. They get work done. They just graft, and they move on. They move on and move on. And they can be incredible. But then there's a detriment then generally in the personal sphere. So not everything has a pros and a cons. So one of the interesting things that you find, again, one of the big complaints in the world comes, for example, from feminism. So feminism is saying that women are being kept out of certain positions because male patriarchy and male oppression and so on and so forth. And women are being limited to administrative roles and things of that sort. But here's the interesting thing, right? So, for example, the typical, let's give it a very, very stereotypical scenario, right? You have high businessman, and he's got a PA, a personal assistant, who organizes his life for him. And the PA, the businessman, tends to be a man, and then the PA tends to be a woman. And feminists don't like this, liberal people don't like this at all. This is sexist, this is a problem. Now, here's the interesting thing, right? If you go and you look at the personality trait, conscientiousness, both the businessman and the PA are very, very hardworking people, right? It's not that the businessman doesn't do anything, right? The businessman, this idea that the high and mighty business people, the CEOs and stuff, that they just sit around smoking cigars, that's rubbish, right? That's just pure. That's just ignorance at its finest, right? It's typical of people who just don't know what it's like to run a business. Anyone that's ever run a business, whether it is just a small shop or anything, you know that if you are the man in charge, you work a lot, right? It's a huge responsibility. It's not kick your feet up and just do whatever you want at all, right? So those people who are CEOs, they're really, really hardworking, and because there's about 1 million demands on a CEO at any given time, but like just constantly being demanded all the time, that if their days aren't highly organized, they simply wouldn't be able to function at all. Now, here's the interesting thing. Generally speaking, men are more industrious than women, right? So they will generally be the CEOs and those types of people. And the people who are more higher in orderliness tend to be women, which is why women generally get into those PA positions, because they can organize stuff, man. They know they can put down a schedule like like something fierce, man. And it's why women do well. So for example, if you go into law, into the legal profession, for example, financial sectors, where there's a lot of organization that needs to be done, like accountancy and things like that. Women do really, really well in those. Various different types of administrative jobs. Women, they get in there, man, and they do really well, because high conscientiousness, high orderliness, man, they're organized. They've got their ducks in a row, you tell, and so that's why women are generally flocking into those positions, because they like organizing. And if you just think about it, I mean, your mom, think about when you were a kid. Who was more concerned about whether you tidied up your bedroom or not? It was your mom, right? It was your mother. She was the one chasing you around, and dad was like, no, do what your mother tells you. And if you had to go to the fathers and secretly, get them to confess, they'd be like, well, we don't really know why you should clean up your room. I mean, there are better things to do with your day. It's going to get messed up anyway, but so generally speaking, that's the case. Now, here's the interesting thing. If you think about conscientiousness, it seems like, if you break it down, the industriousness, because these load on specific emotions, right? These personality traits load on specific emotions. So if you take a person who's very, very industrious and you tell them, well, just sit down and relax for a little bit, they start to feel guilty that they're not doing something, right? They feel, yeah, I think guilt is the right word. They start feeling guilty. Now, here's the interesting thing. The guilt tends to load on the industriousness, or the industriousness subcategory, subtrait, tends to load on the guilt. Well, I should be doing something, otherwise the world is gonna fall apart if I'm not busy doing something all the time. And it seems like the orderliness loads on the disgust factor, or the disgust circuitry. So here's the interesting thing, right? Which of the two genders is the most easy to disgust? It's woman, right? The word ill was probably invented by a woman, right? That's why let's say a man approaches a woman because he's trying to get, oh, she's quite nice, I'm going to go and have a go. And if she rejects him, how do women generally speak of men that they reject? Or he's in terms that load on the disgust sort of description, right? So it's, he's greasy, he's like a unshaven and unclean, it's actually quite interesting. So men, if you ever want to get, if you want to maximize your success in getting a girl, don't gross her out. Make sure you clean and showered and a bit of perfume and stuff like that. And this is why women in general, you go into the bathroom, right? Every couple on the planet knows the battle, right? You go into the bathroom, a guy's got like his little razor and his toothbrush in the corner, and he can live with nothing but that, and his deodorant. That's it. Right? The razor, the toothbrush, and the deodorant. That's all a man needs, right? Just get it done and off you go. No, not woman. Hey, it's just the bathroom is taken over by her personal cleanliness stuff, right? And so it's just so interesting how these things come out in the different genders, So these people that are like, gender roles are a social construct. That's just nonsense. It's like, again, if you go to and look at the egalitarian societies like Sweden and all these kinds of places where they have done more than any other country to remove the barriers that feminists and people like that have always said are there preventing women from going one way and funneling women into only one way. And you go to those societies and men, and there's no barriers. And men still go and do what men generally do, be engineers, and because engineering is dirty work, right? When you talk about what's typically the male roles in society, I mean, what is it? It's engineering, it's mechanics, it's plumbing, It's all the dirty jobs, right? That's what men go and do. And women avoid that like the plague. And women generally, they prefer, well, we'll go into the administrative stuff. And even in the egalitarian societies, women generally go more into the medicine, more into the psychology, so dealing with people, that's the agreeableness trait, and go into administrative jobs, which is the conscientious, the orderliness trait. They go out into the world and they organize stuff, right? Which is why women, I mean, if you go and you look at most of the activist groups, who's organizing them? It's women, generally. That's why they're so good at that, right? So, and that's why they're so... That's one of the reasons why it's so easy to get women riled up in order to go out and do social change, because they're agreeable. So yes, let's go out and fight for the oppressed. And because they're high in orderliness, hey, they've got no problem going out and telling people, oh, this is how you should do things, and this is how you should do that. That's how you should do that. You know, if you think about the health and safety sort of thing, you know, health and safety, that's... If there were no woman, there would be no such thing as health and safety, right? You just guaranteed men would go and just, we don't care. There would be no health and safety whatsoever. Human resources, there would probably be no such thing as human resources if there was no woman in the world. That would just be like, you know, guys would just look at each other. It's like, dude, suck it up, carry on, right? That's how it is, you know, because that's the industriousness. It's like, suck it up and carry on. Right, industriousness, and you know, woman who's orderliness and agreeableness. It's like, no, we need safety, and we need this, and we need that, and let's partition this off here, and so you can actually, and that's how bureaucracies tend to propagate. I mean, it's not that it's only women; it's men too. So, for example, what profession more than anyone else absolutely loves to tell other people what to do? It's politicians. Right? You want to know why governments and bureaucracies become the way they do, right? Where you've got to fill out a form in triplicate just to pass wind in a different direction, right? It's because most of the highly conscientious people, they go into politics. There you have it, right? It's one of the reasons why we should avoid politics, you know, giving governments all the power, because, hey, conscientious people, they like power. The more power you give them to organize and micromanage things, the better, right? Then they will micromanage you, man, if you give them half a chance. So, you know, it's one of those interesting things there. So you see that interesting split in the gender roles there. It's absolutely fascinating. And obviously you get crossovers, you know, because we're speaking in general terms here, right? So that's an absolutely fascinating thing there. Now, interestingly enough, if you look at the what seems to motivate conscientiousness in people, right? So it's interesting if you look again at, I was talking about the guilt and the disgust, right? So it's why people who are low in conscientiousness, they don't mind things being untidy, or, you know, they don't really clean stuff, because it's like, so here's the interesting thing. If you're going to get married, even if you're just a little bit more conscientious than your partner, which means you get irritated with mess 5 minutes before your partner does, you're going to always feel like you are the only one that's ever bothered by mess, right? Even if it's just like 5 minutes before, you know. So if you had just sat down for 5 more minutes, your partner would have then got irritated with the mess and would have gone out and got up and cleaned it. But because you're always just that much ahead, you always think like, oh, I'm always the one that's always cleaning and always doing everything, you know. And so this can be a fight in couples as well. It's like, why don't you clean? And you're so lazy. You just leave stuff lying around, and you forget where you put things and stuff like that. And I mean, like my wife with me, she's like, Morgan, you just put stuff down and you forget where you put it. And always, she's the one that knows where everything is, you know. It's absolutely fascinating, because here's the interesting thing. I'm in the 65th percentile of conscientiousness, so I'm not that bad, you know. I work hard and all that sort of thing, you know. I'm honest, I'm reliable. I'm not one of those people that if you tell me be here at this time, then I'm 2 hours late, you know. But my wife is, wow, she's really, really high. She's in the 90s something. I forget exactly what it is. And she's, but now here's an interesting thing. Going even beyond that is, and this is very, very important to society. So going to the other side, right? So high conscientiousness, organized, low conscientiousness, don't mind being untidy and unreliable. Now, low conscientiousness is also associated with criminality. Very, very, very powerfully associated with criminality. So, ladies and gentlemen, your kids, if you've got a child that's low in conscientiousness and low in agreeableness, you need to make sure that child gets some attention, because that is the strongest predictor of criminality. It's the correlation is so unbelievable. So, for example, I got the other day I came across a publication in the journal PLOS ONE, and what they did, it was here in the UK. The study was done here in the UK of something like 400,000 people, and what they did is they went to all the different how can you say, all the different postcodes or boroughs or boroughs, I believe is the word, or councils, and they did personality trait tests on the people in order to find out, on average, what is the average rate at which the personality traits across the 5 traits are expressed in each borough. And so what I did, just as an interesting thought experiment for my own self, is I took those results and I went and I compared them to crime statistics. And sure enough, wherever there is a preponderance of people low in conscientiousness and low agreeableness, the crime rate is sky high, is absolutely sky high. And wherever there is high conscientiousness and high agreeableness, there's virtually no crime whatsoever, like almost none. You get like 50 crimes a year, you're right, and most of them are like what do they call it? Antisocial behavior. So people out on the drink, and they get up and they start causing trouble, right? Very, very, very interesting. Very interesting. And another thing is so for example, conscientiousness is the place, is the trait of people who are very, very hardworking, very business minded, very business oriented. They like structure, they like being organized, and so on and so forth. So if you look at this map, and I'm going to do I'm actually going to dedicate an episode just to that particular study. So where would you expect in the UK where all the conscientious people would then end up? In London, for example. In London, all the conscientious people are there. In central London, London City, Greater London, all of the big cities. That's where massive preponderance of highly conscientious people all end up. Very, very, very interesting. And then again, wherever you see, there are places in this country where the average level of conscientiousness is as low as 13th percentile on average. 13th percentile. And I can't remember the name of the place, but the crime rate from between 2016 to 2017, there was something in this particular borough alone, there was something like 1,500 violent crimes, like sexual and violent crimes and antisocial behavior. Was it like another 1,000? It was absolutely astonishing. Very, very low conscientiousness. It seems to actually be a stronger predictor of criminality than even low agreeableness is. Very, very interesting. Because one of the interesting things, like for example, if you go to central London, this statistic I remember, go to central London, that's where all the business people are. That's where it's the financial hub of the world, basically, right? It's where the School of Economics, if I've got the name correctly, it's where people like Soros and those people were educated in global economics and things like that. The agreeableness is so low. It's about 8.5 percentile. that is so ridiculously low. It's unbelievable. It's like those people care about no one, right? Someone that is that low in agreeableness is almost like sociopaths. It's that low. But that's actually, if I'm not mistaken, where the highest degrees of conscientiousness is in the whole of the UK. And there is criminality in there, but nowhere near like other places which have significantly higher, like 2-3 times higher rates of agreeableness, but much lower rates of conscientiousness. So the conscientiousness is those people are going there and they're extremely, extremely successful, which is why, if you refer back to my video on agreeableness, the strongest predictor for success in the business world, like if you want to be a millionaire, if you want to know what are your chances of being a millionaire or a billionaire, billionaire, is if you're very, very high in conscientiousness. So you're hitting like 90th percentile, 95th percentile, and low in agreeableness. So you want to be like 40 or lower, and you'll know chances are, because you work like hell, right? You do nothing but work, and you don't care about anything or anyone. You just go and you graft. So you've got no time for anything but your work, which is and that's why the CEOs are the CEOs. For that's exactly why, and that's why they're men, because high industriousness of that kind is almost exclusively found in men, right? Whereas the woman, on average, being more agreeable, they don't like that cutthroatness that's required, and they're more orderly. So the industriousness, that to chase that materialistic, that money is not there. They like being organized, but not necessarily pounding out new business and new ventures. It's astonishing how these things correlate. Absolutely fascinating. And here's the thing, right? So there's a lot of people who wish that they could be more organized and things like that. And it is good to be more organized and things of that sort, but it can be too much. It really, really can be too much. So a lot of people who have and it was very common for people of my generation, and probably even still now, where parents, they do nothing but work, and the parents are never around. You grow up and your parents are never there, right? They're always at work. And that's one of the failings of very, very high conscientious people. It's like, if you want to marry someone who's actually going to be around and spend quality time with you and know how to relax with you, you don't want a person who's overly high in conscientiousness at all, because they're gonna constantly be thinking about what's going on at the office, and that can be a real problem. So if you're high in conscientiousness, you need to get a grip on that, and you've got to make the balance. But then again, if you're low in conscientiousness and you're basically a lazy bum, you got to bring it up, and chances are you're going to be criminal. Now here's another interesting thing, right? So if you look at, and this is very, very significant for those of you who have addictions of any kind, is low conscientiousness. Conscientiousness is where impulse control comes from, right? So people who are disciplined, so basically, I'm hungry, but I won't eat. That takes like self-discipline, for example, or there's an extra piece of pudding, right? But no, I'm not going to have it because I'm on a diet. The higher you are in conscientiousness, the more likely you are to discipline and have self-control, sacrifice the present for the future, long-term planning and things of that sort. But if you're very, very low in conscientiousness, chances are you're going to end up addicted to something, because you're driven by your impulses. I feel like doing it, I'll do it. And there's very, very, very little thought for the hereafter, for the tomorrow. What are the consequences and things like that? Low conscientious people, it's tough. So if you go out and do a personality, because here's one of the interesting things when we talk about the issue of drugs and cigarettes and alcohol, they're like, oh well, I don't have to be careful because there are those people that can stop smoking, like they've smoked all their lives, but they can stop smoking like right now, put the cigarette down, and boom, that's it. They'll never smoke again. Only people who are absurdly high in conscientiousness can actually do that. If you're low in conscientiousness, you've got no chance. You will not be able to do that. Your impulses and your addictions are going to take you out. So go and do a personality. First of all, don't do drugs and stuff like that. It's stupid. Whether you're conscientious or not, it's just, you're going to ruin yourself, right? Just don't do it. But if you absolutely have to, it would be a very, very good idea for you to go and do a personality trait test. And if you're low in conscientiousness, just don't even go there, because if you get hooked, you're not going to be able to stop. You're gonna battle like hell, man. It's gonna have its way with you. You're gonna enslave yourself to those addictions. So again, it's one of those things. It's why, oh yeah, I'm a bit stiff today. My work can be a bit. I'm an engineer, and sometimes I can be like on a machine like this all day. Anyway, so when you look at society, because here's one of the interesting things. Again, going back to the social justice warriors and people of that sort, right? They're like, the only reason why anyone is poor at all is because patriarchy. It's because unfairness. It's because capitalism and stuff like that. That's rubbish. If you look at the people in the very, very bottom rung of society, all of those people, they tend to have problems with alcohol. They have to tend to have problems with various kinds of drugs, and they tend to be unemployed. Well, why? Well, if you're low, and if you go and you have a look at them, the vast majority of them are low in agreeableness and low in conscientiousness. And why? Well, people who are low in conscientiousness, they don't work. It's simple as that. They don't work. They've got low impulse control, which means they're going to be addicted to stuff. They're low in conscientiousness, which means they don't mind breaking the law. They don't. For them, rules are irrelevant. So they end up being more criminal and things of that sort. And that's why. So if you want to really see the one of the strongest predictors of where you're going to end up on the social scale from poverty to wealthy, right? You actually have there's a direct correlation between low conscientiousness. People tend to be on the more poverty side of things, and high conscientiousness people tend to be on the more wealthy side of things. So when people say, and so the personality trait is an objective standard and irrefutable, so scientifically sound, because there's biological things in there as well, right? That the fact that there's such thing as poor people is not only down to social inequality and social injustice and all that kind of rubbish, right? And it is true when conservative people are saying that as long as you work hard and get an education, you will do well in life. They're actually right. In the West, if you work hard and you get an education and you don't get knocked up, or you don't knock someone else up when you're a teenager and all that kind of stuff, that you're almost guaranteed to be able to lift yourself up out of whatever social class that you're in. It's almost guaranteed, right? Obviously there are other things in life, because sometimes things that are unfair happen. I mean, it's happened to me, man. Sometimes I've just been something completely out of my control has just come in and taken me out at the knees, man, and it happens, absolutely. So let's not diminish that, but fortunately I'm conscientious enough that I stuck to it and I kept going, and I've managed to pull myself up significantly out of the social class that I used to be in, where once upon a time I lived in my car, right? It wasn't for very long, because I had the kindness of friends to help me out. But that was my situation once upon a time, and I'm a minority. I'm a foreigner. I'm an immigrant, right? So this idea that if you're an immigrant, and I'm a Latino, so if you're an immigrant, if you have mixed race, or if you all this kind of stuff, that you've got no chance in the West, that's a plain flat out lie. It's a flat out lie, and it's nothing but an excuse for people who are racist against white people to flaunt and voice their racism with impunity. It's wrong, right? Because I am at least one person who is an immigrant to a Western country and was honest and worked my butt off, and I managed to improve my social situation, right? So people need to abolish this idea that if you put it in someone's mind that no matter what they do, the man is going to get them, the man is going to do them in, then you defeat them before they've even tried. Okay, so we need to dispense with these kind of stupid social justice narratives. They're destructive, and they help absolutely no one. So that little rant aside, now, so that's the consideration. If you are low in conscientious, just be aware, man. You're at risk of some really, really horrible things. But now on the flip side, right? If you are very, very, very high in conscientiousness, right, there are problems that can happen there too. Like I said earlier on, your family life will suffer because you're always thinking about what's going on at work, right? You're not present. Because one of the traits of being high in conscientiousness is that you tend to be very future oriented, right? You plan for the future, you budget for the future. You've probably got on your computer somewhere on a PowerPoint or a Word document or something like that, right? Where you've got your budget, every cent that you will have spent and that you will spend over the next 20 years, right? So you will find that you struggle to be present a lot, which is then something that people low in conscientiousness don't have a problem with. They're only mindful of the present, and they're not mindful in the future, which is generally why they do things now, which then mess them up later on. And they're like, well, I never saw that coming. Well, that's why. So there's that problem, you're right. You will struggle to be present with your family, with your friends, with your loved ones, and things of that, because you're always chasing something in the future over there, right? And that's good, but not always. You've got to find the balance. Now, here's an interesting thing, and it blew me away when I discovered it, when I came into all these things, and when the pieces started falling. When you pathologize a trait, so at the bottom end of conscientiousness, you have impulse control problems, addictive personalities, and criminality and things of that sort. On the other end of the spectrum, so we have heard of things like if you talk about anorexia, if you talk about obsessive compulsive disorder and disorders of that sort, those are actually disorders of conscientiousness gone too far on the extreme high end, right? Now here's the interesting thing, right? Because if you and this also explains why these disorders actually affect women more than they affect men. Because if you think about like anorexia, for example, and obsessive compulsive disorder, it's this insane need to be neat and tidy and organized, and this obsession with cleanliness and purity and the obsessive need to control, right? Because high conscientiousness is people, they need to control, they have control issues, right? That's where the control issues come from. They need to control everything. And one of the interesting things is that people who are high in conscientiousness generally have lower rates of neuroticism because they organize their environment, which means it makes you calmer. So you are a calmer person when you organize your environment. And that's one of the interesting things, because one of the accusations that liberals tend to throw at conservatives is that, oh, they're like that because they're always worrying about stuff. But if you actually look at the personality profiles, conservative people are actually much lower in neuroticism and negative emotions than the liberals are. So that's very interesting. But the reason for that is because they organize their environment, things are neat and tidy, they've got their ducks in a row, and so then you can afford to relax, right? So, and that's where you get this obsession from. So obsessive compulsive disorder, anorexia, these are things. So when I was talking about the sub-traits where you've got the industriousness and you've got the orderliness, Orderliness loads on the disgust circuitry, so to speak, in the brain. So things disgust you very, very easily, and things need to be all orderly in their place. Where if you have your plate, the peas cannot touch the potatoes, cannot touch the rice. It's like a salad is the worst, is a problem because everything's mixed up. And if you talk to someone that has these issues, it's like these things are contaminating each other. And it ruins people. Man, it ruins people. So there's another disorder. So for example, if I have a look here, there's a disorder called emetophobia. Emetophobia is a fear of vomiting or seeing other people be sick. Those who experience emetophobia may also fear being out of control while they are being sick, or fear being sick in public. So again, it's a disorder of the conscientious trait, where it's because being sick, it's disease, it's contaminated, it's disgusting. And one of the reasons, like for an anorexic person, if you hear them describe their bodies, they use disgust language. I'm disgusting, I'm contaminated, I'm dirty, I'm whatever. And they're obsessed with purity and cleanliness. And that's why they want to get sort of thin down to the bones, because the concept is so to speak, the bones are pure, they're clean, they're white, and that's what they're headed towards. It's not a problem with food per se, it's a problem with wanting to be clean and pure. And it's also a control issue because I've actually spoken to people with anorexia. I actually know. I've actually bothered to go and speak to them and get these things out of them. So with food, for example, so here's the thing. You can't survive without food. Human beings are dependent on food. And someone who is obsessive, is a control freak, they will resent the fact that they have to rely on food for their survival. So it's devastating. It's that they have a love-hate relationship with the food. It's like, I need the food because I need to survive, and it actually kind of tastes nice, but at the same time I absolutely hate the fact that I'm dependent on the food in order to survive, in order to live. It's absolutely brutal. And this is actually how you can separate the actual anorexic people from those people who have fake anorexia or faux anorexia, right? Because there's a lot of faux anorexia going on there. Oh, I just want to be thin. It's like, no, that's vanity. I want to be thin and look sexy. Shut up, right? That's garbage. It's like those people have absolutely no idea what it's like to be an actual anorexic. It ruins your life. It chases you around, man. It's like, and it's literally it's like being chased around by a roaring lion all the time, right? Or some of them describe like having a monkey on your shoulder it's constantly on you about things like, this is going to contaminate that can't be like this can't be like that can't be like that. And here's the interesting thing, right? For a person with these disorders, obsessive compulsive and stuff like that, they will describe it like having a voice that's constantly telling them, you have to do this or else. There's never actually the explanation, or if you say or else what, they can't tell you or else what. There's no what, but there's an or else, because something in the future is going to come and get you if you don't do this, right? And again, it goes to validate what I said earlier on, where people who are high in conscientiousness are more future minded, right? If I do this now, plan for the future so that the future will be better, and so on and so forth. And so when you have the anorexia, when you have the obsessive compulsive disorder and all that kind of stuff, you are forever worried about what might happen. You have to do this, or there will be a disaster. What kind of a disaster? I don't know what disaster. Just a disaster. It's the undefined disaster that is always looming, and it ruins you. It absolutely ruins you. And it's a battle. It's a fight. I've worked with people like this, and it's an absolutely brutal thing to try and get people over. And so that's what it is. There's this, it loads on the disgust mechanism. I am disgusted with, and therefore I must recoil. I must decontaminate. I must, and all of these things. And here's the interesting thing. It's why again, if you look at a lot of the social justice rhetoric, you can see a lot of this language is out there, right? You know exactly who you're talking to if you can, what kind of a person you're talking to. If you hear the kind of language, if they're using languages of disgust, it's contaminated, it's disgusting, you're like vermin, you're like rats, you're like whatever. So, for example, perfect example, right? One of the most iconic deviations or pathologies of conscientiousness that the world has ever known was actually Adolf Hitler. Because how did he speak about the Jews? That the Jews were like vermin. The Jews were like they were like a virus that needed to be extinguished. And he spoke this way about disabled people as well. They're like a virus, and they must be eradicated. You must burn them. You must gas them. That the people that they didn't approve of, and he was obsessed with one of it's Aryan purity. And here's the interesting thing: it most likely had less to do with whiteness than it had to do with a perception of purity, which is very, very interesting. And if you look at the way he spoke, everything was always about, this is a disgusting, contaminating thing that we must eradicate from existence. All of his speeches were like that. And if you go and you look at how the military was, when they had the parades and things like that, the people, they were lined up in perfect order. And this is actually very typical of totalitarian states. So if you go and you look at North Korea, for example, it's very militaristic. And the people, it's that goose, that stupid goose step. It's like, who the hell thought that was a good idea to walk like that, Totally idiotic. And everyone is in perfect line, and everything is perfect, like symmetrical, like, Greek god type of thing. Absolutely brilliant. It's a pathology. It's a conscientiousness gone completely and utterly insane and berserk, which is why a lot of the liberal people fear the conservatives, because they're like, well, the conservatives are going to be controlling, and which is why the liberals keep on calling conservatives Nazis. That's why they do that, right? They are Nazis, right? The problem is, here's the interesting thing, right? And we're going to discuss this later on, where if you're low in conscientiousness, Hitler was a perfect example of what happens if high conscientiousness goes berserk. But if you want to know what happens when low conscientiousness goes berserk, or when not low conscientiousness so much, but when high openness goes berserk, which is what the liberals are, you get Stalin. So Hitler and Stalin, the most in the 21st century, at like the same time, you had the perfect example of what happens when conscientiousness goes berserk and what happens when openness goes berserk. Fascinating, absolutely fascinating. It's Marxism. Marxism is the trait of the overly liberal, overly open left, and National Socialism is the typical of, again, generally speaking, of the over extreme right. Very, very fascinating. So getting back to the conscientiousness and the disgust factor, Hitler even had approved, like even art that was approved and art that he didn't disapprove of. So art, and you see that in there as well, the orderly. Fascinating. I mean, I'm not an art person, but it came out in his art as well, and you see it, even though I'm not articulate enough to actually describe those things, but it's absolutely mind-boggling. So yeah, that's conscientiousness, man. So those of you who have someone who's got obsessive compulsive disorder in your life, or anorexia, or one of these kinds of things, emetophobia, one of these things, that that what's chasing them around is a load on the disgust factor, right? And which is why they're so obsessed with purity and cleanliness and things like that. Now here's another thing, ladies and gentlemen. I want you to cast your mind over to the fashion industry. Now, women have always blamed the pathologies of the fashion industry on men. which is interesting. It seems like, why is it that men are blamed for everything? I mean, good grief. It's like, dear woman, take some responsibility for yourselves for a change. And here, let me tell you why. The fashion industry proves that it's not men's fault, that these ridiculously stupid standards of beauty have nothing to do with men. Nothing at all. Right, so we know conscientiousness, if we look at anorexia and obsessive compulsive disorder and things like that, it affects women significantly more than it affects men. Significantly more. Right? Which is why it's typically associated with women. You think anorexia, you don't think of a man, you think of a woman. Right? And that's where you get gender prominent diseases. So, for example, anorexia is more prominent in women, but ADHD and autism was more prominent in men. And there's reasons for that. So, if you look at the fashion industry, what's the obsession about again? It's cleanliness, it's skinniness, it's about controlling. It's about control yourself and what you eat, the way you dress. Is obsession with the way you dress, with the way you look. Am I like this or like that, or whatever the case might be? You know, and if you're fat, then you're disgusting, and you're this and like that, and the next thing. So all of these feminists that go around raging against fat shaming, that's your sisters. That's other women. It's not men, right? Because here's the thing, right? If you want to know what kind of body men like, go and do a survey of pornography, right? It's that simple, right? If you go and look at pornography, what kind of women are the most popular when it comes to male pornography, right? Badunk, right? We like it big, okay? The more the better, right? You know, shake it around, kind of, you know. That's what men like, you know. Obviously, there are those men that like skinny and, you know, skeletal or whatever, obviously, right? There's taste for everything. But the vast majority, if you look at the most successful, like porn stars and stuff like that, it's boobs out here, it's backside out here, it's big, it's big, and it's larger than life, okay? That's what men like, okay? They want something to squeeze, they want something to smother, and, you know, stick their faces. That's what men like. I apologize if this maybe is a bit crass, but that's what men like, okay? It's not skinny little in the corner there. It's like, what am I going to do with that? I'm going to break her in half. You know, guys don't like, generally speaking, for the most part, guys don't like that, right? They and talk to any man. Say, what do you think of the fashion industry? Oh, I think it's stupid. It's that simple, right? So where did the fashion industry come from? Okay. Now, before people fully understood all of these things like anorexia and stuff like that was actually for a long time seen as a disease, the disease of high achieving women. And here's the interesting thing: it actually is a disease of high achieving women. Why? Because high achieving women will be ridiculously high in conscientiousness. And if you pathologize that, then there's an obsession with control, there's an obsession with cleanliness, there's an obsession with orderliness, there's an obsession with purity, high disgust sensitivity. So I want to be skinny, I want to be thin. So the fashion industry, literally, in the deepest, truest sense, right? The fashion industry is the product, is the beauty ideal of a high conscientiousness, anorexically inclined woman. That's what the fashion industry is modeled after. It's not modeled after the tastes of men. The fashion industry is modeled after the taste of women. And if you look at the psychological factors like conscientiousness, for example, where everything loads on, right? That's what the fashion industry is literally is. If you think about like these little teenage girls that run around and they want to be all so skinny and all that kind of stuff, the fashion industry is the beauty standard, is the beauty standard of a teenage girl, of a highly conscientiousness, orderliness, disgust sensitivity, obsessed teenage girl. That's what the fashion industry for women is. Because let me tell you now, if the fashion industry was influenced by men, it would look nothing like what it does today. Absolutely nothing like what it does today. Not by a long shot, right? And so it's really, really fascinating. It's why that those women, if you go to those women who are high achievers, you go to the the Hollywood actresses and the supermodels and all that kind of stuff, they've all got eating disorders. Every single one of them, right? They've all got eating disorders. They've all got these problems. But now, who do they want to blame? Oh, it's men's fault. It's the patriarchy. It's because we made them do it, right? That's the shift which is so interesting. It's like high conscientious people tend to take responsibility, which is a little bit of a contradiction there. They tend to take responsibility, but these people, all they ever do is blame society and blame men for it, right? No. It's not. Men have nothing to do with that. And I mean, the fashion industry is dominated by women and homosexuals. It's dominated by them. And interestingly enough, a lot of homosexuals, specifically the men, they manifest the same kind of traits, which is why homosexual men. I've spent a lot of time around homosexual men, and one of the interesting thing that I noticed or observed myself is how many of them were successful at business and stuff like that. Well, there we go, high conscientiousness, right? And all of them, they're obsessed with the way they look. They are unlike your sort of average man who's could care less about his appearance, right? Homosexual men, hey, it's the the beard like this and like that, and the hair, so on and so forth. It's got to be, so they go off and they get involved in a lot in industries where so homosexual men, where do they go? They go into the fashion industry. They go into, like, for example, my brother is homosexual, and he goes and he's a hairdresser. The hair like this, like that, and everything. You go to his house. His house is immaculate, right? His house is immaculate. You come to my bedroom and it's a disaster. His house is immaculate, right? And if I think about my brother, as he has been through his whole life, he's a sensitive to disgust, very, very interesting. And all the gay men that I've known by hanging out with him, mostly because of him. And also, I used to live with a transgender guy as well once, because I used to, before I could afford a place of my own, I used to rent a room in a house and stuff like that. And so I would rent wherever I could get one. And I've never had a problem I've got no problem with homosexual people and transgender. I disagree, but I don't have a problem with them as a people. So I lived with a transgender guy as well, and it was the same thing, man. Same thing. The house was immaculate and very, very disgust sensitive, and it's one of the reasons me and him didn't get along. Well, we got along in general, but one of the reasons we didn't get along so well is because I found him overbearing, because he was micromanaging everything, and I wanted a little bit more liberty. It's like, come on, stop niggling. Even the way I pack the dishwasher, it's got to be like this, otherwise disaster. It's absolutely fascinating, right? To see how these are traits of conscientiousness, whether it's high, whether it's low, they're the pitfalls, they're the benefits and the pitfalls, and it's you've got to know where you are so that you can manage it, man. It's devastating. Oh, I've said a lot, haven't I? Here's an interesting. Where is it? Exploring the benefits of conscientiousness, an investigation of the role of daily stresses and health behaviors. Now, here's the interesting thing, right? Again, everything, if you go to the description of the video, I think it's down here somewhere, or maybe down here somewhere. I don't know, right? One of the two. And you click, there's a little arrow, click down and it'll expand, and you've got all the description there. I'm going to put the links to all of these bits of literature. So referring back to what I spoke to you about earlier on is where they did a study to see how conscientiousness mitigates your stress in your life and your overall health behavior. So people that are high in conscientiousness, obviously not to the point where you've now got pathologies and things like that, like anorexia and OCD and so on and so forth. They found that people who are high in conscientiousness, because they've got a lot more, they've got the impulse control under order. So there's a difference between impulse and compulsion, right? So impulse is pops in my head, I do it. I feel like doing it, boom, I do it. Whereas compulsion is something that compels you in a habitual sense to go. And there's actually where they originate from is actually quite different, even though they're ultimately somewhat similar. So on the high end of conscientiousness, like the anorexia and the OCD, those are compulsions. You are compelled. It's like something is forcing you. You have to do this. Whereas, so you're being forced to do something, even though you might not. Because here's the interesting thing, right? People think that anorexics and people like with OCD, they don't want to be that. They know that sometimes this is a problem, right? And here's the thing: they have control issues, and the fact that their pathology controls them then makes it even worse, because they've lost control to the fact that they have these disorders that's controlling them. It's awful, right? So that's being compelled, whereas impulse is you want to do it, but you can't stop yourself from doing what you want to do, right? So it's very, very interesting. There's a subtle difference. So people that now are normal and they're functioning, high in conscientiousness, they're functioning, they work hard and everything, right? They found that such people are less stressed because they organize their things, right? There's a bill over there that I need to pay. Well, they just pay it, rather than someone who's low in conscientiousness. They'd leave that bill sitting on the table over there for 3 weeks, and it's like, I got to pay that bill. And it's constantly nagging you at the back of your mind. So if you want to minimize stress in your life, be more conscientious. Stop procrastinating. See that bill that's sitting over there, wherever, or that whatever little thing that needs to be done, just go and do it. You'll feel better afterwards. You really, really do. Go and vacuum your house a little bit. Go polish, tidy things up. It'll make you feel a lot better. And because people who are conscientious, they like to form schedules and routines and habits. They're a lot more likely to form healthy habits. So, for example, like, someone who's low in conscientiousness, there's no impulse control. I want a beer, I'll have a beer. Coca-Cola, I'll have a Coca-Cola, right? It's because these foods trigger the dopaminergic reward system. The incentives are go and get, right? That's actually the basis of addiction, by the way, right? Is that dopamine in your brain that says go and get it, right? So people who are high in conscientious, they've got that too, which is why they're self-motivated and they can do those things, but they've got the self-control at the same time. So they've got the impulse control in order. And so, for example, the best practices for good health, right, and I'm going to discuss it in my health section, right, is you only eat a certain amount per day. You don't overeat, you don't undereat. You eat at the right times. So, people who are high in conscientiousness, they're like, well, now's the time to eat, now is when I'll eat, and then I'll stop eating. And they're less likely to snack. So, to go off and snack because, well, now this is the rule. They're very, very much about rules, right? And it's one of the pathologies of, if you go into obsessive compulsive, is like, why can't you do that? Because it's the rule. Where did the rule come from? I don't know. It's just the rule, right? So they're all about these rules. Well, now is not the time for eating, therefore I'm not going to eat. And so that's a lot more conducive to having good health, right? Now is bedtime. I'm not going to stay up until 3 a.m. watching YouTube videos, right? Feel free to watch mine at any time. They don't stay up until 3 a.m. watching YouTube videos. They get to bed, and good proper sleep is better for your health, is better for your stress management. They're more likely to be self-motivated to the point where they can get up and go and exercise and go for a run in the morning, and they're a lot more disciplined, and that's much more conducive to good health, and they'll make better decisions regarding food and things like that as well. So very, very good. High conscientiousness, very strongly correlated with better health, with lower levels of stress and things of that sort. So it's a very, very good thing to have. They're more likely to become vegetarians or vegans and things of that sort as well. Very, very good. Or at least be convinced of it. No, I lie. Actually, I lie. No, that's not necessarily the case. But in general, make proper health choices and stick to it. They're not necessarily the vegan thing. Because you'll find a lot of people who are very, very high in openness, they're actually a lot in a lot of cases more the ones that are championing veganism, but for kind of other reasons. It's subtle, it's complicated. Anyway, so yeah, here's another one here: health and longevity as well. Health and longevity if you're high in conscientiousness. And here's one of the things as well: it's like if you're high in conscientiousness, not only are you more organized and you make better decisions in general, you plan for the future, right? So if you're future minded, well, I'm not going to smoke the cigarette now because in a few years I'm going to get cancer. Well, that's obviously not a good thing. Things of that sort. They meditate on the consequences of their actions. But one of the things as well is that because they're harder working, right, they will have more stable jobs, which means, and if you've got a stable job, you've got a stable life, you've got a stable income, which means you're lower stress. And if the lower you are in stress, the less you need to binge on unhealthy foods, because people who binge on unhealthy foods, what a lot of people don't realize, you're actually self-medicating because there's a stress. That's why a lot of people, when they stress, they eat, because again, dopamine and things of that sort going on. It helps relax you. So more stable job, stable life, stable finances, and if the finances are in order, you can afford a better quality of food and things of that sort. Better job satisfaction because you're hardworking and things go well, or you don't have the boss constantly after you because you're organized and things of that sort. You will tend to be a model employee. So it's very, very highly correlated to job success, or health and longevity and all that sort of things. And all of these things, they tie into each other to make a whole package of a person. So, that is it. That is conscientiousness for you. Society of Behavioral Medicine. Yeah, so this is there anything else I can say about conscientiousness? I think I've said it all. Yeah, it's brutal, man. They're actually, all of the personality traits can be absolutely brutal. Absolutely brutal. One more thing. If you're high conscientiousness, so in your personal life, you're going to be very, very overbearing. Very overbearing, very demanding, very judgmental on other people. Especially if you're low in agreeableness as well. Your high agreeableness will mitigate that quite a bit. But if you're high conscientiousness and low in agreeableness, you're gonna be overbearing. And if you're raising kids, you gotta watch that out. You gotta give people space to grow. Not your way is not the only way, right? And you'll find this, people high in conscientiousness, they're like, it's my way or the highway. My way is the only way that's right. No. You've got to give people, because here's the thing, if you let that run away with you, you can become a bit of a tyrant, right? It's what I say and when I say it, the infamous because I said so, right? Man, I hate it when people say that, because I said so. It makes the low conscientious, low agreeableness side of me want to punch you in the face. It's awful. Because I said so. Give me a reason. Oh man. So you can, if you're high in conscientiousness, man, you've got to really be careful that you don't harangue and become overbearing and chase your family or your peers around, give people a break, and stuff like that. Just realize not everyone's like you in that way. Just because you're willing to work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, doesn't mean that's the right thing to. Actually, that's the wrong thing to do. But it doesn't mean everyone else has to be that way. I've seen. Here, this is actually one of the interesting problems. When I was au pairing, I au paired for a family where both the parents were extremely, extremely high in conscientiousness, right? So, which obviously they meant that they were both highly successful, the man and the woman. I mean, the lady, she drove like this, the newest Porsche, right? And he had the new Mercedes, an AMG, whatever fancy thing that it was in those days. Highly successful people, really high. So, and you requires that high stress load, high organized job. They were there. They were really successful, which is why they could afford to hire an au pair. And I mean, the car I used to drive with an au pair was this Mercedes sort of minivan thing with all the bells and whistles. This thing was magnificent. But let me tell you, man, these children were harangued. These children, it did them no good whatsoever, because studying psychology the way I've done, children require unscheduled, unstructured, free, rough and tumble play, to just go and play with sticks and just invent their own, use their imagination to invent their own games and be free. So all you need to do is just sit there and just don't interfere. Just let them go and do their own thing and interact, and this develops social skills, interact with each other and whatever. And I could tell that these kids had none of that, absolutely none of that. And one of the things as an au pair, I spent my life driving them from one event to the next event to the next. It was chess, swimming, karate, judo, gym, this and these kids were exhausted beyond belief. They would cry, and I don't want to go do this, I'm tired. And I'm sure there are a lot of educators among you that will know children like this, where the children, they're falling asleep in class, they're completely exhausted. They come to your extra, like if you've got the extracurricular activities at school, where the kids, they're in tears because they're absolutely exhausted. You will know that it's because the parents are constantly, they're high in conscientiousness, and they're forcing these kids to just go all the time. That's and you mean well. If you're a high conscientious person, it's like you mean well, and it comes from a good place, where you mean well, you want the best for them, and you want them to have all these experiences, but you're actually abusing them, right? The children, they're not supposed to be like that until much later on. When they're still young, they need free time to play and relax and have an afternoon nap and things like that, man. You can't do that to kids. And if you're doing that to your kids, stop it. Right now, go and cancel some of whatever it is they do. Children are not meant to be doing 50 million things as if they're going to be world professionals, and they're going to resent you, right? You're setting your children up to resent you. So be aware of this. And I saw this in these kids, man. And here's the thing, they had all of these they had all of these things catered to them, and all the extracurricular activities and all this kind of thing. But the one thing they needed the most, which is the parents, well, they're high in conscientiousness. The parents were never around. They were always working. And so the children were constantly being raised by someone else. While I was there, or the maid, or whoever it was. And they were starved for the love and the affection of the parents, and they were so undisciplined. It was unbelievable. It was impossible to discipline them. And then these parents, they meant well. I'm sure they meant well, but they've completely ruined their children. I shudder for what these children are going to become, because they were pathological as well. The way they used to treat I used to see them do some things to some of the other kids, and I was like, you've raised a monster. That's a monster that you've raised there. It's not good. So be careful, guys. High conscientiousness in its moderation, everything in its moderation, in its proportions. It's good, high successful and stuff, but you've got to also know when to let go and when to relax. And if you're low in conscientiousness, stop. You've relaxed too much. You need to work a bit harder. Otherwise, you're not going to be successful. It's that way. And you can't always blame someone else, right? And that's what society is trying to do. Society is trying to blame the fact that some people are lazy and therefore poor, as it's society's fault. It's not society's fault. Some people are poor because they're lazy, because they don't care, because whatever the case might be. And it's not to say that there shouldn't be some kind of welfare system to help them out, to get into, because there's jobs that might appeal to them, that they will work for, that give them the right incentive. But you can't just go handing out money, because people who are low in conscientiousness and low agreeableness, they have absolutely no problem whatsoever just taking advantage of society, taking advantage of the taxpayer. They'll take, if you want to just give them money for nothing, they'll take it, no problem. All right, and these are the kind of people that if they had to win the lottery, they would end up killing themselves. So because, well, now I've got no restraint. Here's the thing, right? For people who are low in conscientiousness, who have no impulse control, poverty can actually be a blessing, because it means they can't afford the drugs that they would otherwise have. And you get that. And you hear stories about this all the time. People who win the lottery and they utterly ruin themselves, because all of that money, right, removes the financial barrier to everything. Now the person is low in conscientiousness, they've got no impulse control, so their impulses destroy them and destroy those around them, because the barrier have been removed. Whereas with conscientiousness, people who are high in conscientiousness, they have the inner barriers already. So if you give them lots of money, they have the self-discipline and the personal regulation and the barriers, so they will manage that money better and they will become more so. And that's the thing. If you give money to a highly successful person, they'll do more with it. But someone who's low in conscientiousness, if you give them a lot of money, they'll squander it and they'll end up killing themselves. So, and this is where the conversation in terms of welfare has been completely unbalanced. It's like personal responsibility is simply not spoken of at all, and welfare is actually ruining lives more than it's actually helping people in a lot of ways. And people need to understand that there's a difference between charity and welfare. It's not the same thing. Charity is helping people in need. Welfare is sustaining lazy people. And that's the difference. Charity is out of love, of a community sense of duty and community responsibility to help those people who are in need. Hard times have fallen on them. We go in, we help them out. We rally as a community out of love and care for our neighbor, and we go in, we help them out when the hard times fall on them. Whereas wealth and charity is, I will take money from my own self and give it to these people because I see the need, and it's me doing something willingly. Whereas welfare is the government, is someone else taking your money by force away from you, by force, which is what the government does, right? The government can enforce rules. Why? Because they can use violence. In the final analysis, they can come with guns and force you to do something if you refuse to comply. So welfare is the government using the force of the state to take money away from you, to give it to someone who's practically useless and lazy. Now, it's true that it might help some genuinely needy people, right? But when you've got a system that just hands out money indiscriminately, then it's exactly the wrong kind of people who are going to take advantage of the system, because generally speaking, those ones who have a genuine need they're in that situation because something out of their control has befallen them. So they're not there because of their own stupidity or their own negligence, which means their conscientiousness, and conscientious people are less likely to accept welfare than someone who's low in conscientiousness, right? So if we say that welfare is there to help out the genuinely needy, the thing is, the genuinely needy are less likely to actually accept welfare. Chances are they won't, and they will find alternative means to support themselves because they prefer to have their own control and their own dignity. So welfare, for the most part, obviously not exclusively, but for the most part, the welfare it sustains and aggravates the situation where lazy, good for nothing, useless, low impulse control, low conscientious people can simply take advantage of the money that people are giving because they've been forced to. And that's the difference. Charity and welfare are not the same thing. Anyway, right, I'm going to leave it at that because, oh man, there's always a lot more that can be said, but I hope that helps you guys with understand conscientiousness and how it can play out and the pitfalls and the benefits and things of that sort in society. I hope this I really hope this helps you. And yeah, and that's it. Thank you very much, everyone. And goodbye, cheerio, and God bless. Please subscribe and share to other people. You know, I'd like to be, you know, this to help as many people as possible. You know, it would be, we need it. All right, cheerio, bye.